things I was asked to cover today was a bit of my background. So the first slide, I will cover some of the stuff that Aaron already spoke of, not in too much detail. I do hope to be able to talk about policing, and more specifically policing here in Sudbury, where we are and where we're going to. And I look across the audience here, and this is just about coming up on a one-year anniversary for me. About this time last year, I had finished the interviews and was starting to make the trek up and down the 400 highway every week. And in a very short year, I'm able to look across the room and very confidently call a whole number of people friends, and I really do love that. I want to acknowledge as well the sponsors for the lunch, Mark and Michael from United Way and Eastlink. I will say in our presentation today, when we talk about community safety and well-being, it really is a partnership, and that partnership goes out to corporate partnership as well. It isn't just public organizations and individuals. We can't do that without support from agencies like Eastlink and United Way. So thank you very much for your support. We'll see if I can get this going in the right direction. And so the things that we'll talk about, again, as I say, my background. I keep getting asked what brought me here. The answer of a car doesn't seem to go so well, so we'll get into some of that stuff. I also, in recent weeks and months, there's been a lot of questions about the business of policing and the governance model of policing. So I want to share just a little light about the environmental structure within which your police service works. Of course, there doesn't seem to be a conversation I have with anybody, including my kids, that doesn't talk about the drivers of public safety, community safety, that digresses down to costs of policing. So we will talk about that, and I'll start off very briefly saying we're not alone. Sudbury is not alone in talking about costs and economics. Just finished a 4-day summit in Ottawa, national summit hosted by Public Safety Canada at the federal level. Academics, police leaders, board members from across the country, all struggling with the very question that we struggle with here in our community on a daily basis. And then it's one thing to struggle with it, it's another thing to deal with it, and that's where I hope to take us as well, is what are we doing here in Sudbury? What's our response to those things? So I have spent 35 years in policing. I like to try and convince people that I started when I was 3, but nobody seems to buy into that. I got a couple of little nephews that looked at me and said, "What are those lines on your forehead?" Okay, I'm getting old. But in 35 years of policing, I can tell you it's a wonderful profession. I can tell you it's a noble profession, it's an honorable profession, and it's a profession where our frontline members, in fact all of our staff, look at this as far more than just a job. It really is a calling, and it's a calling to do things right. It's a calling to make a difference in our community, and I'm proud for 35 years to have been part of that. My career has seen me go through everything from frontline policing to complex criminal investigations, worked in a homicide squad, armed robbery squads, critical incident command. And I'll say that I'm proud of all of that work, but I think the thing I'm most proud of is the work that I did in community services, building what is now the model for community mobilization and citizen engagement for this province. I can tell you I'm standing up here completely convinced that the only go-forward way for public safety is a shared strategy. That is what brought me up here, without question. As far as the profession goes, what I really liked about the Greater Sudbury Police Service, what I really saw in our Police Services Board was vision. I really saw a community that was committed to moving forward together, and that is where I thought it was a good fit for me to continue in that direction. As I said over and over again, I didn't take over a sinking ship. I took over a ship that was going in the right direction, and it's just a matter of me carrying the torch and taking us to the next level. We are leaders in collaboration. Some of the stuff that's going on here in Sudbury is groundbreaking stuff and continues to be groundbreaking stuff, and I'll talk about that later on. I'll say as well, I come from York Region, 9 different municipalities, 9 different mayors. I don't see a Mayor Bayer here. I don't see any councillors here either. But having 1 mayor is a lot easier than having 9 mayors. But a large geography, and again, some of the similarities that we see here in Sudbury, where the uniqueness of delivering service in Levac is as important and precious as the issues we're dealing with in downtown, in our downtown core. And so that challenge that we have as a regional service to deliver services that are equitable and fair is what I came from. So again, I thought that was going to be a good fit for me. And I will say as well, this is not just the place I chose to work, it's also the place I chose to live. A lot of consideration about, you know, is this where we want to live? I've gone into that story before where at a very young age, I wanted to be a lumberjack. And I know Monty Python has a joke about that. I won't start singing any songs, but my wife and I and our kids, we always spent our summers in the north. We camped at Killarney, we camped at Grundy. 2 girls, and not wanting to be too gender specific, but they would only take so much mud before they said, "Dad, can we go into the mall?" So into Sudbury we came to get washed and cleaned and have a proper cooked meal. So the chance to live in the north, to spend the rest of my life in the north is what brought me and my wife here. Karen mentioned I've got a daughter that ran away from home and is now living in Vancouver. So, you know, a plane ride from Vancouver to Sudbury, or a plane ride from Vancouver to York Region, no difference. This is truly where I want to be. So let's get right into it. So why in the world does policing cost so much? You know, and you know, I really do wish I had that magic pill. I really wish I could flip the switch and say, here's the answer. I can tell you academics are debating it. I can tell you police leaders are debating it. I can tell you communities are debating it. But I can tell you that our job is significantly more complex than it ever has been. And that complexity, with that complexity comes increased workload, it comes with increased expectations, and the only way we have to deal with that is through human resources, in other words, people. That, for me, is one of the things, and I'll speak about some of the specific statistics around that later on in my presentation. Investigative time. It wasn't that long ago that going to one of the calls that we go to all too infrequently, a domestic violence call, was really done in about an hour. You know, and there would be a conversation between a husband and a wife, and sort of an agreement to let things be, and out the door we go. Well, we know that research has shown over and over again that quite candidly we were responding improperly and dealing with it improperly. It is criminal behavior, and that behavior is something that we need to deal with. And then, of course, the complexities that come with criminal investigations have changed things as well. We still have the same expectations. I mean, when we just finished our business planning process, I'm sure nobody in this room is surprised. We didn't hear we want less policing. We didn't hear, will you please lay off some officers. We heard we want more police officers. We want to see more police officers. Downtown business people, right? You want police officers walking the beat. So the things that were expected 30 years ago are still very much true today. And yet, the expectations continue to change. You know, and again, I don't mean to lead too many of the slides, but we end up being the emergency responder of choice for so much. And I often say, if not us, then who? So who at 3 o'clock in the morning are you going to call if the snowbanks are too high? You know? Or if your neighbor's making noise? Or if somebody suffering with mental illness acts out? I just saw a press release recently, and I don't mean any slight to the Ministry of Natural Resources, but it was about a coyote problem. I don't know if it was in Cape Real, it doesn't matter. It was somewhere local where there was a coyote problem. And I read the press release. I wasn't consulted about the press release. I read the press release that says, here's the number for the Ministry of Natural Resources, and we'll try and come out if we can. But if not, call the police. So we're coyote catchers too. You know, the other thing that's really difficult for us to deal with, and admittedly we're behind step on this, is social media, the speed of information coming out. I think we all heard the tragic situation out in Moncton about a year ago today, where 4 officers lost their lives. In that situation, there were tactical officers set up in that community specifically looking for an active shooter. Major threat to the community. People were tweeting out the locations of the tactical officers live time. When schools go into lockdowns now, kids are tweeting out live time what's going on, and people are picking up on that. We're not equipped. We're not yet equipped to deal with that. Stories are going viral, and we're not being able to catch up with it. Cyber-based crime. When you look at what's happening now, we used to be pretty comfortable that whoever committed a crime in Sudbury or in our hometown probably lived pretty close to it. Crimes are happening across the seas now. Words that never were even part of our language just a few years ago. Sexting. That's a word. You know, and you know, so the situation where a young, more often than not, girl takes a picture of herself in a compromising position and sends it to her boyfriend thinking it's safe because we're in love. And that then gets retweeted or sent out again, is a criminal offense, especially if the person is underage. How do we deal with that when the offender may not even be in our community? And more on that as well. Identity theft. Again, you know, without speaking about the age demographics of everybody in this room, but I'm sure 30 years ago, any of us thinking that somebody could actually steal who we are, identify themselves as us, start receiving mail and setting up bank accounts in our name, was completely foreign to us. You know, Twitter is only 9 years old, and so you look at how quick that's moved. We used to deal with threats on buildings. You know, we used to think about how do we fortify this building and fire alarms and fire drills and stuff like that. That's the least of our concerns now. It's the threats to the infrastructure, the computers, our data, that entire corporations can be shut down and crippled. And again, as a police service, we've got to somehow modify to be able to deal with that, but still be able to walk down the main street of Levack and shake hands with the local store owner. Child pornography. We'll talk about that right now. Computer crime. So I can date myself. My first computer I bought had 750 megabytes of storage space. And I was told, that's all you'll ever need in your life. There's absolutely no reason why any human being would need more storage space. So you can go to any local box store right now and buy a laptop for $429. That's where I got the number from. It was a flyer. That has a terabyte of storage space. How much is a terabyte? It holds 120 million pieces of two-sided paper or 2 million photographs. So when our officers conduct a child pornography investigation with the sharing of images, and they seize a computer and seize the hard drive, where before we would go in and get a photo album with some pictures. Or we might go into an office and get a file cabinet with some pictures. We're now getting 200 million pictures potentially, and every picture has to be looked at Every picture has to be determined whether or not it's potentially criminal in nature, and every picture of it has to be disclosed in a court. Here's the stat when I talked about domestic violence. Historically, an officer would attend, about an hour, a report's taken. Today, it's typically a 12-hour investigation. So you look at the numbers, these are Sudbury numbers. Last year we did 2,100 domestic violence calls. If you multiply that by 12 hours, it's the equivalent of almost 12 extra police officers that we need just for domestic violence calls. And when you quantify that, $1.4 million. What are the cost drivers? I'll give you a couple other statistics. This comes from a report out of Simon Fraser University in 2013. Over a 30-year period, so in my time in policing, the time that it takes to investigate a break and enter into a home, another pretty common report, has gone up 58%. The time that it takes to investigate drunk driving, DUI case, has gone up 250%, and a domestic violence case has gone up 964%. The time. And the time comes from the judicial process. We have to get search warrants for things that we used to just be able to get as a matter of course. Talk about old versus new. We used to keep diary books and write the names of our contacts into a diary book. When we arrest somebody, get the diary book, we're able to look at the diary book and go, okay, you're friends with this person and that person. It's now on some sort of a computer device, usually a phone. That is locked. We need a search warrant to get into that. That search warrant takes hours to write. We may or may not get it. And then we get into it and we're dealing with a terabyte worth of information. So you can see we get about 60,000 calls. That's where the public calls us and says, please come. I'm not talking about how many things we generate ourselves. I'm not talking about how many times we walk by and talk to people or anything like that. 60,000 calls, of which only 15% of those were criminal. So who's heard crime is dropping, and therefore police costs should drop accordingly? Who's in the restaurant business here? That's like saying, I tasted your appetizer, and therefore I've decided your entire main course is no good. It's like saying, in the hospital, because I keep saying, isn't crime prevention our job? In Emerge, doctors are saving too many lives. We better lay some off. And I don't mean to be flippant about it. I'm simply saying, please don't judge us by 15% of what we do. I'm saying all of the other 85% of the things the public places value on. We are asked over and over and over to deal with traffic issues, not criminal, to deal with youth loitering issues, to deal with drinking, alcohol issues, noise complaints, mental health calls, and rightfully so, because if not us, then who? Here's just a quick list of the top calls for service that your police service, my police service, did last year. Alarm calls. #1 call type for us. We typically send 2 officers to it for officer safety because you never know. 4,605 times we're going to that call because somebody bought an alarm. Out of that 4,600 times, I think it's only less than 1% that there's actually a break-in. Theft, okay, now we've got a criminal offense, shoplifting and that type of stuff. 911 calls, not necessarily criminal, a lot of them silent 911 calls, accidental 911 calls. Lost property, found property, not talking about criminal. Missing persons. We treat every missing person as if there was a potential that it was a homicide. We really have to find out evidence that a person is alive before we can say, well, let's not investigate it as a homicide. Very time consuming, 1,500 of those, not criminal. Domestic disputes, sometimes criminal, sometimes not. Unwanted person, there's somebody here that I don't want here anymore, not criminal. Call for police assistance. Can we have the police come over? We'd like them to stand by while we exchange custody of our children. Causing disturbance, disturbing the peace and noise complaints. These are the top consumers of calls for us. What else? Sudbury statistically, and these statistics come from the Sudbury District Health Unit, have excess alcohol consumption rates. 22.2% alcohol consumption rates compared to 16.9 or 17% for the rest of the province. What does that mean? Alcohol isn't illegal. Thank you. But how many of the calls that we deal with have alcohol at its roots? A lot. Higher rates of non-prescription drug use. You know, suicides. 87 deaths over a four-year period of time right here in our city. Suicides. And suicides, again, until we are able to prove that it's not a homicide, are very, very labor-intensive investigations for us. Oh, sorry, I'm mixing two. 87 drug deaths due to toxicity, and then the higher suicide rates. So the two are connected. Either way, it's death investigations for us, but neither one of those show up as a criminal stat, okay? So somebody that dies because they committed suicide, or somebody that dies because they overdosed on drugs, are not criminal. They don't show up as these falling criminal rates. Mental health cases, so look at the numbers there. We have 83 active mental health cases per 100,000 population. The rest of the province is about half of that, 527. And a person suffering with mental illness is 3 to 5 times more likely to come in contact with the police. And let me say it very clearly. Mental illness is not a crime. It's not a crime. It's the health system. And again, not pointing fingers, but we know that there was a deliberate decision made to move health care for those suffering with mental illness into the community, right? And that's when, all of a sudden, police start dealing with persons suffering with mental illness more often. And I just ask myself, what kind of system dealing with a health issue says the line of last defense is going to be a gun and a taser? You know, kudos to our officers that do their best. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and thousands of interaction with persons suffering with mental illness that result positively. We've got a great connection with our hospital here. We've got great connections with our partners here. We do put people and steer people in the right direction. 1 million positive stories, but there's one. There's one where lethal use of force is used, and then the point of attack is at the point of contact on the police. An inquest comes out, more training, more this, more that, more costs. We know that here in Sudbury, our seniors population is growing. We know that our First Nations communities are growing at a higher rate. And we know that we're becoming more diverse. We know that our country is growing through diversity. None of that is bad. None of that is bad. It's just a different service delivery that's required. When I speak to representatives from our First Nation community, you know what we're talking about all the time? Relationships. We're talking about getting to know each other, understand each other. Where's that show up on the crime stat? How do I measure that and get back to the community and say, we're doing good work? When the calls are cut, 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 what do we cut? Relationship building? You know, we talk about seniors. We know that seniors are far less likely to be victims of crime, but they're far more concerned with crime. So we have to work with seniors to help protect them against the threats that are out there as well. So really, when you're talking about policing, and that's what I'm talking about, nationally and locally, there really are 3 bundles of work. Proactive work, that's stuff that we do, connecting with kids, connecting with diverse communities, connecting with our communities. That is work. We also have reactive work, calls for service. Funny though, we only get measured on reactive work. And then finally, all of the administrative work. The administrative work directly associated by the judicial system, as I said, it accounts for about 40% of our costs. 40% of our costs, and I have no control over it. When we start talking about dashboard cameras and body cameras, and I say, yeah, we look forward to that. You know, transparency, for all the right reasons, there's a lot of good evidence that supports it, but there's a cost. It's not the cost of the camera. It's the cost of the storage of the data and then producing that data to court. Because we have to pixelate to protect privacy individuals that are on that camera that may not want their picture on the camera, youth, voices, you know, a young person speaking, we can't disclose that. So I've got to hire a team of audio-visual experts that pixelate all of that stuff. It takes hours and hours and hours to do the workup so that we can disclose that 20-minute piece of video. We're working towards that. We're embracing that. We're piloting that here. But that administrative work gets lost in the discussion about how come policing costs so much. Public opinion, business case. How much time do I have, Karen? I'm good? You keep giving me the finger. I'm not sure if that's positive or negative. You know, you know, we did our business planning process. I want to single out Bill Best at the back there. Bill, representing Cambrian College, he was doing his business planning process while we were doing ours. He was doing a better job, so we were stealing some of his ideas and going, okay, let's bring them into ours. And we were able to get, you know, a good cross-section of business community, individual members. You know, there was surveys that went out as well. And the things that we know our community still values and still wants to see are greater police presence and visibility, human costs, traffic enforcement and education, not criminal, more police officers on the beat, expensive, more focus on alcohol and drug enforcement. So, you know, again, this piece that says, take it out of my sight, please. Can you just come and be the arresters, the law enforcers? Overall, people are saying more police is a good thing. They are continuing to look at us for leaders for solutions. I can tell you we're always getting brought into discussions about what are we going to do about this situation or that situation, and we welcome it because it is a shared approach. But so how do we respond to it? So this year in Sudbury, innovative strategy, unique in this area, unique in this country, but not the first of. You know, it's an evolution piece. And we're talking about community safety personnel. So the question that you've heard me answer over and over and over again about policing is, if you don't need a gun, and you don't need a taser, and you don't need pepper spray to do the job, do you need to be a police officer? So in situations where we're providing education to seniors groups, or we're providing education to youth groups, where we're taking reports, situations where there's absolutely no expectation for us to execute search warrants, arrest people, or apply force, is there an alternative way of delivering service? And when we asked that question in our surveys, the community said loud and clear, absolutely. I'm very happy that somebody other than an officer with guns comes to my house and takes a report that says, while I was away on vacation, somebody broke into my shed and stole this. You know, why not? So we've created a unique program where we're looking at functions that our sworn police officers, our most expensive resource, are doing, that can move over to other areas and free up that sworn officer time, so the sworn officer can do exactly what everybody in this room wants them to do, which is police presence downtown, dealing with high-risk situations. But if they're off dealing with non-violent bylaw calls, because it happens to happen after hours, then they're not able to deal with high-risk, high-threat issues. They're not able to interrogate suspects and help victims of crime. So we're looking at that as a cost-effective way to continue to deliver the quality of service that our community expects, but in the most effective way possible while still being efficient. Their salary dollars are less than police dollars, but that's not where the real savings are. Police also have all of this equipment that costs money. They have adequacy standards with training that have to be reinforced year after year after year. A person that's not a police officer still requires training to do the job, but doesn't require that annual training over and over and over again that ends up being cost effective. And the other piece of it is, they're not challenged by time. So what I hear from our officers is they'd like to spend a little bit more time and maybe get to know the person that they're talking to, or interact or develop relationships, but they can't because they're being called off to a car accident or they're being called off to something else. So these people, it'll be their exclusive function to do these jobs, and they can then focus on that and make that a priority. So our challenge is to balance responsible spending, balance budgets, maintain budgets, not overreact to perceived overspending, but to make sure that we're doing so with a business case that's fiscally responsible. The truth of the fact is, whenever you hear about the costs of policing, it's not necessarily laid in the context of other public services, and we're not growing that much higher than other public services. But, unfortunately, public safety is expensive. Simply saying I don't want to pay that much doesn't get us to where we have to do. I wish I had that silver bullet answer, but trust me, we're working towards it. So we are redesigning the way we're approaching things. We are looking at best practices. We are looking at new performance measures. We're looking at this modernized approach to deliver service and alternative methods. We are completely committed to addressing safety and security in this community. And what I'll say at the end of the day, police service in this community is still less than 90 cents a day per person. Less than a small cup of coffee for police service, for community safety and well-being. And I think we're delivering on that day in and day out. So with that, I'll say thank you very much. I'm certainly open to any questions you may have. And we'll open up the floor. I don't know how we can work.